A fiery debate erupted on live television as Senator Rand Paul called Vice President JD Vance arrogant during a tense exchange. But Vance did not back down. Instead, he fired back with a sharp, unexpected response that stunned the panel and left Paul visibly shaken. It was a moment that flipped the entire narrative, and by dawn, Washington was buzzing as phones lit up with a bombshell tweet from President Trump accusing Rand Paul of betraying the MAGA movement by voting against their bill, calling him sad and bribed by the left, while hailing JD Vance as the future. By noon, every major network had scrambled to cover an impromptu debate between Rand Paul and JD Vance. Rand publicly challenged a young VP, dismissing him as smug, and untested. The studio bristled with tension. As cameras rolled, Rand forced a smile, while JD sat calm, yet his eyes burned with resolve. When asked why he demanded this debate, Rand leaned forward, accusing JD of being arrogant and out of touch. The crowd gasped. JD lifted his head and countered with quiet force, telling Rand it was conviction, not arrogance, that led him to stand by Trump's bill to help working families. While Rand chose lobbyists over people, the panel fell silent. Rand scoffed, insisting he voted his conscience. JD stare hardened, and he accused Rand of bowing to lobbyists, which struck like a knife. The audience tensed, and social media exploded with Vance saves Rand. Rand's smile faltered, and he warned JD to be careful. JD shot back he'd be careful when Rand was honest. There was no applause, just heavy truth. Then JD told Rand he'd been in D.C. too long and forgotten how to serve, not just survive. Rand retorted that JD was young and politics was not black and white. JD agreed, maybe, but said he would never learn to betray the people who trusted him. The room held its breath. Tears welled in a woman's eyes as she whispered, "He's fighting for us." Something shifted. Rand felt at the studio scene to close in on him. JD pulled a folded paper from his pocket, revealing it was a donation record showing Rand received $800,000 from liberal tech billionaires right before voting no on the bill. Rand tried to deny it. JD cut him off, telling him the receipts were public. The crowd gasped, and the moderator looked stunned. JD turned to the camera, telling Americans Rand voted against their health care, tax relief, and border security because he got paid. Rand half growled, accusing JD of manipulating facts. JD's voice cracked with pain as he brought up a single mother in Ohio working 3 jobs who cried when the bill failed, and how Rand failed her. The camera zoomed in on JD's tear-filled eyes, raw and human. Rand looked down. Silent America saw it. Sweat dotted his forehead. The moderator gave Rand a chance to respond. He tried to dismiss JD's points as cherry-picking. JD stayed calm, telling him it was easy to sell out after too long in the Senate. The crowd murmured. Man in the front row whispered, "Wow." JD stood raising the paper, asking Rand if he knew how many veterans and children would have benefited from the bill. Rand tried to cut in. JD didn't allow it. Instead, he accused Rand of taking money from groups that lobbied against the bill. Flashes from cameras captured everything. Rand turned red and accused JD of riding Trump's coattails. JD shot back he was protecting the movement. Rand betrayed. The crowd applauded briefly, but the silence afterward was even louder. JD turned to Rand, speaking softly, yet it hit like thunder, saying Rand didn't vote on principle, but for 30 pieces of silver. The audience gasped. Rand opened his mouth, then closed it. Caught. The moderator was stunned. JD said he wasn't there for theatrics, but because people were hurting and needed to know who was fighting for them and who was selling them out on Twitter. 30 pieces of silver began trending. The camera cut to a young woman in tears, whispering, "He's saying what we've all felt." Rand's voice cracked, calling it a disgusting accusation. JD stared him down, telling him to prove it by releasing his donor records. Right there, Rand froze. JD stepped back, and the country watched the senator crumble live. The moderator tried steering back the policy, but it was too late. The mask had fallen. Rand grabbed a water bottle. His hand shaking. JD remained standing firm, outlining how the bill would have helped secure borders, supported small businesses, and funded disabled vets, asking why Rand voted no. Rand didn't answer. JD said it was because Rand thought no one would. Notice cameras captured everything. Staffers whispered. Rand's aide buried his head in his hands. JD then pulled out a small photo of a veteran in a wheelchair with his child, saying this was Jacob, who lost both legs in Iraq, whose daughter needed insulin. That would have cost $25 on the bill, but now paid $312. JD told Rand he voted no on Jacob. Someone sobbed aloud. Rand dropped his gaze, and hearts across the country broke for Jacob. The studio was hushed even. The lights seemed dimmer. JD carefully put the photo away and simply looked at Rand. That silence roared louder than any speech Rand tried to speak, but only managed a shaky breath. JD quietly said, "Sometimes silence says everything. Right now yours screams guilt." A woman began to weep. Truly a mother Who knew what insulin costs meant the moderator's voice cracked, offering Rand a final chance to respond. He claimed it was character assassination JD, cut in telling him it was accountability and the people. We're watching backstage viewership numbers explode. A producer whispered this isn't just a debate, it's a reckoning. Then Rand's phone buzzed on a moderator's table. Everyone heard of the camera zoomed in, revealing a tech senator. Shut it down now, we're exposed meeting at 6 JD. Caught it, asked Rand if he'd like to explain. Rand stammered. It was personal. JD didn't raise his voice, only noted it looked like someone was nervous about what else he had, pulling more documents from a folder. He revealed donations linked to groups that oppose Trump's bill. And even a Chinese tech firm Rand tried to snatch the papers. JD pulled back, saying Rand started this by calling him arrogant, but now it was just exposed aides. Panic backstage, trying to cut the feed. But it was too late. The debate director refused to stop the broadcast across America. Reactions pouring. A veteran in Indiana wiped his eyes, saying that boy Vance finally spoke for us. In Alabama, a trucker pulled over to watch on his phone, saying, "This isn't just a debate, this is history." And in the West Wing, President Trump nodded slowly, saying, "That's my vice president, VP." He whispered back in studio Rand Paul was unraveling. He muttered, "This is a setup, a smear campaign." JD Vance stood again, holding the documents, telling Rand. He thought he could attack and deflect from his betrayal, but the truth always finds its way up. Then he turned to the camera, speaking to America, saying, this was not about left or right, it was about honesty. And if they could not have that in the Senate, then what were they even fighting for? A single clap broke the air, then another, until the whole room rose to its feet. JD did not smile. He simply stood there solid, unshaken. The debate was still live, and the network decided to open the phone lines. A moderator announced they would take one call, and a quiet teenage voice came through, saying his name was Caleb. He was 16. His mom had diabetes, worked nights, so he could stay in school. When the bill was blocked, she cried, because they could not afford her insulin anymore. JD lowered his head, heartbroken. Caleb then asked Senator Paul why. He said no, it was his mom. Not worth it. Rand stared at the table. Caleb sniffled and thanked JD for fighting for people like them. JD cleared his throat, told Caleb to tell his mom she was worth everything and he would not stop fighting for her. Them tears gathered in the moderator's eyes. Even crew members wiped their faces. Rand finally whispered, "This is being twisted." JD's voice cracked, saying, "No, Senator, this is being revealed." Caleb's line went silent, but his words rang across the nation. JD was not just winning a debate, he was changing lives live on TV. Just as the tension eased, a moderator received a note. Her eyes widened. They had someone in the audience who asked to speak. His name was Jacob. JD's head snapped up. It was a veteran. The man in the photo. The audience gasped as Jacob wheeled himself on stage. Broad-shouldered Marine, missing both legs. The room stood in reverence as he adjusted the mic. He said he did not come to be a prop. He came to speak the truth. He thanked JD for remembering him, then turned to Rand, asking if he remembered him. Rand shifted, said he met many people. "No, you don't." Jacob cut, and he wrote Rand's office twice, begged him to support the bill. Was ignored. Jacob's voice cracked, saying Rand looked away from him like his sacrifice meant nothing. Then he saluted JD, saying he might have lost his legs, but he could still recognize honor. The audience broke. Some wept openly, some stood and saluted back. Rand looked like a man already defeated, tried to regain control. He claimed he had served the country honorably and called it theater. JD raised his hand, saying if betrayal had a face, it would be yours. In this moment, gasps erupted. Jacob lowered his head, hands shaking. The moderator looked stunned. JD turned to the camera, voice soft but blazing, telling America he did not come to humiliate a senator, but to defend the people forgotten. The mother scraping for insulin, the soldier discarded the boy begging for help. He stepped closer, told him not to call it complicated or politics. Rand knew what was right and sold it for a price. Rand lowered his head, unable to speak. JD told the audience this was their country, not a playground for sellouts. It was time to remember who they were. People clapped, some cried, but no one looked at Rand the same again. While JD's words echoed across home, something else unfolded in the Senate chamber. Lawmakers paused, staffers crowded TVs, even old-timers sat silent. Senator Josh Hawley leaned to a colleague, saying this was no longer debate, it was a movement nearby. Senator Tim Scott nodded. Quietly, Rand lit the match, but JD turned it into a fire back in the studio. The moderator held a note. Over 18 million viewers, trending #1 in 22 countries. JD did not celebrate. He stood still listening. Then a woman mid-40s, hair in a bun, voice trembling, stood, saying her husband, a coal miner in West Virginia, died last year from cancer. The bill would help cover his hospital debt. She asked Senator Paul why. He said no. Rand tried to answer. Only a whisper came, "I did not know." JD turned to her, saying she should never have to beg for help after losing the man she loved. She cried, and so did Millions JD then pulled a small envelope from his jacket, saying he debated bringing it, but decided people deserved to see he handed it to the moderator. Inside was a list of donations to Rand's campaign from 5 major left-wing lobbying groups, and at the bottom, Goldstone Global Alliance, a D.C. firm recently exposed for funneling foreign money into anti-MAGA legislation. The moderator's voice shook, asking Rand if he knowingly accepted those donations. Rand's eyes darted, saying he did not handle every contribution, and called it a smear. JD stepped forward, saying Rand called him arrogant, but accepted money from people trying to destroy the country. That was not arrogance, that was treason to the working class. Silence fell. Rand's lips trembled, saying he did not know. JD's voice was firm, saying no. He did not want to know, then turned to the camera, telling America he did not care what party they were from. If they betrayed the people, they would answer for it. It felt like a line had been drawn inside the White House. President Trump stood in front of a giant screen, hands folded, face stone serious, watching JD expose corruption, defend forgotten, stand up to power. Stephen Miller spoke, saying, "Sir, you picked the right one." Trump did not blink, saying he was not just a VP anymore after night. He might be something more. Back in the studio, JD paused, placing the envelope down, saying he did not run to make friends, he ran to make things right. His voice softened, saying his mother raised him alone in a broken town. He saw people lose everything while politicians smiled, promise he would never be like them. He glanced at Rand, who now looked exhausted, defeated. JD said he kept his promises. The audience rose again, not for a politician, but for a man who finally spoke their hearts. The world fell at the moderator's signal for one last question, but someone unexpected stepped up, a janitor in a blue work shirt, who said he cleaned that studio every day, listened to politicians argue for years, but tonight felt different. He said his name was Marcus, a father before his wife died of cancer. He prayed that Bill would pass, work 2 jobs to survive. He turned to Rand, say he wrote to his office begging, but never got an answer. Then to JD, saying JD came to their city, sat in his daughter's school, and listened. JD walked over, shook his hand, saying he remembered Marcus's story, carried into every meeting. Marcus nodded eyes, with saying he believed JD. The whole room stood again, not applauding, but